The forest screamed my name in whispers only I could hear, a chilling chorus that sank into my bones as I stumbled through the underbrush. At 24, I, Elias Navarro, was no hero, just a barista from a nowhere town in Oregon, chosen by a god I didn't believe in. Tonight, the village elders had bound my wrists and left me at the edge of Blackthorn Woods, their eyes wet with pity and fear, as if I were already a ghost. The ritual was ancient, older than the sagging, clapboard houses of Haven's End. Every decade, the village offered a sacrifice to the forest god, a figure cloaked in myth, said to guard the woods and demand a human to sate his hunger. No one knew what hunger meant, but the chosen never returned. My name had been drawn from a cracked wooden bowl, the same one used for 100 years. And now I stood alone, shivering under a crescent moon, waiting for a deity to claim me. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was the kid who burned toast at the diner, who doodled constellations on napkins during slow shifts, who dreamed of escaping to Portland with enough tips to start over. But Haven's End clung to its traditions like moss to a rotting log, and no one dared defy the elders' decree. The ropes around my wrists chafed, but they were nothing compared to the weight of the village's expectations or the dread pooling in my gut. The air shifted, heavy with the scent of pine and something sharper, like ozone before a storm. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not the monstrous deity I'd imagined, but a man or something like one. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that burned green like foxfire. His dark hair caught the moonlight, and his presence seemed to make the forest hold its breath. "You're the offering," he said, his voice low, resonant, like it came from the earth itself. He didn't move closer, just watched me, his gaze piercing yet strangely gentle. "I'm Elias," I said, my voice cracking. Not some offering." I yanked at the ropes, my defiance more bravado than courage. He tilted his head, a faint smile curling his lips, as if my rebellion amused him. "I'm Kale," he said simply, like we were meeting over coffee, not in a ritual that was supposed to end with my death. He stepped forward, and I braced myself, expecting claws or fire or whatever gods used to consume their prey. Instead, he reached out and untied my wrists with fingers that were warm, human, and impossibly steady. "Why aren't you doing whatever gods do?" I asked, rubbing my freed wrists, my heart hammering. Kale's smile faded, and something raw flickered in his eyes. Loneliness. Maybe. Or regret. "I don't want your fear," he said. "I want your story." And that was when I realized this wasn't the end. It was something far more dangerous, a beginning. The first night in Blackthorn Woods was a blur of starlight and questions. Kale didn't touch me again, didn't demand anything. He just sat across from me on a moss-covered log, his long legs stretched out, and asked about my life. My boring, small-town life. I told him about the diner, about my mom's old jazz records, about the time I tried to run away at 16 and got as far as the county line before chickening out. He listened like every word was a treasure, his eyes never leaving mine. It was unnerving, being seen like that, like I was more than a sacrifice, more than Elias from nowhere. "Oregon. Why me?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. The fireflies around us pulsed like tiny lanterns, and the forest seemed to lean in, waiting for his answer. Kale's jaw tightened, and he looked away, toward the canopy where the stars peeked through. "The village chooses," he said. "But I see you, and I've been alone too long." His words hung between us, heavy with meaning I couldn't grasp. I wanted to ask more what he was, why he was here, what alone meant for a god, but the weight of the night pressed down, and my eyelids grew heavy. When I woke, I was back at the edge of the village, unharmed, the ropes gone, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The elders were waiting, their faces pale with shock. "You're alive," one whispered, as if it were a crime. The second night, I went back, not because I had to, but because I couldn't stay away. The forest called, and Kale was there, waiting in the same clearing. This time, he told me about the woods, how they were alive, how they whispered secrets to him, how he'd been bound to them for centuries. He wasn't a god. Not really. But something older. A guardian cursed to protect Blackthorn at a cost he wouldn't explain. I wanted to hate him for trapping me in this cycle. But his voice, his eyes, his quiet sadness, they pulled me in. By the third night, I was sneaking out of my house, heart racing, to meet him. We talked until dawn, about everything and nothing. He laughed when I described my failed attempt at skateboarding, and I caught myself staring at the way his hands moved when he spoke. Strong and deliberate. I wasn't supposed to feel this way, not for him. Not for anyone in Haven's End, where being gay was a secret you buried deep. But Kale saw me. All of me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide. The village noticed the change. Whispers followed, meet the diner. At the gas station. He's bewitched. They said. The god's playing with him. My mom begged me to stop going, her hands trembling as she clutched my arm. But I couldn't explain the pull. The way Kale's presence made my chest ache with something I hadn't dared name. Love was a dangerous word in Haven's End, especially for someone like me. On the fifth night, everything shifted. Kale was quieter, his eyes darker, like a storm was brewing inside him. They'll come for you, he said, his voice rough. The village. They think I'm corrupting you. I laughed it off, but his expression stopped me cold. Elias, I'm not what they think. But I'm not free either. He reached for my hand, his touch electric. And for a moment, I forgot the world outside the clearing. I forgot the village, the ritual, the fear. There was only him, and the way my heart pounded when he leaned closer, his breath warm against my cheek. The days blurred into a rhythm of secrecy and longing. By day, I poured coffee and dodged questions at the diner, my smile a mask to hide the fire in my chest. By night, I ran to Kale, to the clearing where the world felt bigger, kinder. He told me stories of the forest's passed-off lovers who'd hidden in its depths, of battles fought under its boughs, of a time when he wasn't alone. His words painted pictures, but they also carried pain, a weight he wouldn't let me touch. What happened to you? I asked one night, emboldened by the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing keeping him tethered. Kale's face darkened. I made a choice, he said, his voice barely audible. A long time ago. To protect this place. To protect someone. He wouldn't say more, but the way his fingers tightened around the pendant at his neck, a small, carved stone I hadn't noticed before, told me there was a story he wasn't ready to share. I wanted to push, to unravel him the way he was unraveling me. But I didn't. Instead, I told him about my own secrets, the way I'd known I was gay since I was 12. The way I'd learned to keep it quiet in a town that didn't forgive difference. You're brave, he said, and I laughed. Bitter. I'm not. I'm just surviving. But Kale shook his head, his hand brushing mine, sending sparks up my arm. Surviving here is braver than you know. That night, he didn't let go of my hand, and I didn't pull away. We sat there until the stars faded. Two outcasts in a forest that felt more like home than Haven's End ever had. The village's whispers grew louder. My coworker, Marla, cornered me one morning, her eyes narrow. You're different, Elias. You go into those woods every night, don't you? I shrugged, but my pulse raced. The elders held a meeting, their voices carrying through the thin walls of the community hall. He's defying the ritual. One said, the god will punish us all. I wanted to scream that Kale wasn't like that he wasn't a monster. But I knew they wouldn't listen. To them, I was tainted, and Kale was a threat. On the 10th night, Kale was waiting with a fire built in the clearing, its warmth pushing back the autumn chill. They're coming, he said, his voice steady but his eyes wild. The elders. They think I've broken the pact. My stomach dropped. What pact? I demanded, but he only shook his head. Stay behind me, he said as lanterns flickered in the distance, bobbing like fireflies with purpose. The elders arrived. 6 of them, led by Clara, a woman whose face was all sharp angles and sharper judgment. You've corrupted the offering. She spat at Kale. You were supposed to take him. Not this. Kale stood taller, his presence commanding, almost divine. I don't want his life, he said. I want his light. The words hit me like a punch, and for a moment, I forgot the danger. But Clara's eyes burned with zeal. You've doomed us, she said, and the others raised their lanterns, chanting words I didn't understand, old words that made the air hum with power. Kale flinched, his hand tightening around the pendant, and I realized with a jolt that he wasn't invincible. Whatever he was, he could be hurt. Run, he whispered to me, but I didn't move. I couldn't leave him, not when he'd seen me, not when he'd given me a reason to feel alive. I stepped in front of him, facing Clara. He's not what you think, I said, my voice shaking but loud. He's not a god. He's Kale. The elders froze, their chants faltering, but Clara's face twisted with rage. You're lost, boy, she said, and raised her hand, a blade glinting in the firelight. Kale moved faster than I could blink, pulling me behind him as the blade grazed his arm. Blood, dark and real, dripped onto the forest floor, and the trees seemed to groan in response. Enough, he roared, and the ground trembled, roots twisting up from the earth, forcing the elders back. Clara screamed, but the others fled, their lanterns scattering into the dark. Kale turned to me, his face pale, his arm bleeding. You shouldn't have done that, he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only fear for me. We hid deeper in Blackthorn Woods that night, far from the clearing, where the elders' chants couldn't reach. Kale leaned against a tree, his breathing uneven, the pendant around his neck glinting in the dim light. Tell me the truth, I said, kneeling beside him. What are you? He hesitated, then spoke, his voice raw. I was human. Once. Like you. A long time ago. I made a deal to save someone I loved. The forest took me, made me its guardian. But it came with a price. He told me about Aiden, a man he'd loved centuries ago, a man he'd tried to save from a plague that swept through what was now Haven's End. The forest, alive with ancient magic, offered Kale a bargain, his humanity for Aiden's life. Kale agreed, but the forest lied. Aiden lived, but Kale was bound to Blackthorn, forced to watch over it, to accept sacrifices every decade to keep the balance. They were supposed to be offerings of trust, he said, his voice breaking. But the village turned it into fear. And I couldn't let them take you. His words cracked something open in me. I reached for his hand, my fingers brushing the pendant keepsake from Aiden. He said, the last piece of his old life. You're not alone anymore, I whispered, and his eyes met mine, full of a longing that mirrored my own. We didn't kiss. Not then. But the air between us was alive with possibility, with the kind of hope that could break you. The next morning, I went back to the village. Against Kale's protests. I needed to see my mom, to tell her I was okay, to beg her to understand. But Haven's Inn was a different place now. The diner was empty, the streets quiet except for the murmur of prayers. My mom pulled me inside, her face pale. They're planning something, she said. Clara says the forest is angry, that you've upset the balance. I tried to explain about Kale, about his heart, but she shook her head. Elias, you can't fight a god. He's not a god, I said, but the words felt hollow in the face of her fear. That night, I returned to Kale, but the forest felt different, tense, like it was holding its breath. He was waiting, his arm bandaged, his eyes scanning the trees. They're coming again, he said, and this time, they won't stop. I wanted to argue, but the distant sound of drums low, rhythmic, ancient cut through the night. We ran, deeper into the woods, where the trees grew so thick they blocked the stars. Cale knew every path, every route, but his steps were slower, his face tight with pain. "The forest is tied to me," he said. "If they hurt me, it suffers. If it suffers, they think it's their fault." I realized then what he hadn't said before. The elders' rituals, their chants, weren't just tradition. They were chains, binding Cale to their will, keeping him from breaking free. We stopped at a hidden grove, a place where the air shimmered with faint light, like the forest was alive with its own heartbeat. Cale sank to his knees, exhausted, and I knelt beside him, my hand on his shoulder. "We can leave," I said. "Run. Start over somewhere else." But he shook his head, his fingers brushing mine. "I can't leave the forest. It's part of me. But you could go." The thought of leaving him felt like tearing out my own heart. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and for the first time, I leaned forward, closing the distance between us. Our lips met, soft at first, then desperate, like we were stealing time from the world. The forest seemed to hum, approving, alive with our defiance. But the drums grew louder, closer, and Cale pulled back, his eyes fierce. "They're here," he said. The elders emerged, their lanterns casting jagged light across the grove. Clara led them, her face a mask of righteous fury, a book of ancient rites clutched in her hands. "You've defied the forest's will," she said, her voice cutting through the night. "The god must be sated, or Haven's end will fall." Behind her, villagers I'd known my whole life, Marla, the grocer, even my old high school teacher stood silent, their eyes averted. They weren't here for me. They were here for their fear. Cale stepped forward, his presence commanding despite the blood seeping through his bandage. "Your rituals are lies," he said. "The forest doesn't want death. It wants life." His words shook the air, and the trees rustled, as if agreeing. But Clara raised her book, chanting words that made my skin crawl, words that pulled at Cale like invisible chains. He staggered, clutching the pendant, and I realized with horror that the ritual wasn't just about might, was about controlling him. I lunged at Clara, knocking the book from her hands. "Stop it," I shouted, my voice raw. "He's not your god." The villagers gasped, but Clara's eyes blazed. "You're nothing but a sacrifice," she spat, and raised her blade again. This time, Cale was too slow, weakened by the chant, and the blade caught his side. He fell to his knees, blood pooling, and the forest screamed a sound that wasn't sound, but a vibration that shook my bones. I dropped beside him, my hands pressing against his wound, panic choking me. "Cale, stay with me," I begged, but his eyes were distant, his breath shallow. The villagers hesitated, their resolve wavering as the forest's anger grew, branches snapping, roots twisting. Clara shouted for them to continue, but I saw fear in their faces. They weren't fighting a god anymore. They were fighting something bigger, something alive. "Elias," Cale whispered, his hand finding mine. "The pendant. Break it." I didn't understand, but I trusted him. I yanked the pendant from his neck, its carved stone warm in my palm, and smashed it against a rock. Light exploded, blinding, and the forest roared, a sound of freedom and rage. When my vision cleared, Cale was standing, his wounds gone, his eyes glowing with a power that wasn't divine but something older, purer. The villagers scattered, Clara's screams fading into the night. Cale turned to me, his face soft but fierce. "You freed me," he said, and I realized the pendant had been his chain, the forest's hold on him. But the victory felt hollow. The village would never forgive us. And the forest, though free, was still tied to Cale. "What now?" I asked, my voice trembling. He took my hand, his touch grounding me. "We find a way," he said. together. That night, we didn't return to the village. We stayed in the grove, wrapped in each other's arms. The forest, our only witness. For the first time, I felt like I belonged not to Haven's End, not to a ritual, but to him. We talked about leaving, about finding a place where we could be us. But we both knew it wouldn't be easy. The forest had let Kale go, but its roots were deep, and the village's fear deeper still. We spent the day planning. Kale knew the forest better than anyone, its hidden paths and secret streams. But he was weaker now, human in a way he hadn't been in centuries. Breaking the pendant had freed him, but it had also severed his tie to the forest's magic. He could leave, but the village wouldn't stop hunting us. They'll come for the woods, he said, his voice low. They think it's theirs to control. I nodded, my mind racing. I didn't want to run forever, but I didn't want to lose him either. We decided to face the village one last time. Not with violence, but with truth. I went back alone at first, slipping into my mom's house before the sun rose. She was awake, her eyes red from crying. Elias, why? She asked, and I told her everything about Kale, about the forest, about the love that had saved us both. She didn't understand. Not fully, but she hugged me, her arms trembling. Be careful, she whispered, and it was enough. By noon, Kale and I stood at the edge of Haven's End, the forest at our backs. The villagers gathered, Clara at the front, her face hard but her hands shaking. You've cursed us, she said, but her voice lacked the fire it once had. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. The forest isn't your enemy, I said, and neither is Kale. He's protected you for centuries, and you repaid him with chains. Let us go, and let the forest be. Kale spoke next, his voice steady. Human, I was like you once. Afraid. But fear doesn't have to rule us. He reached for my hand, and I took it, unashamed, even as whispers rippled through the crowd. Some faces softened Marla's. My old teachers, but Clara's didn't. The forest will die without sacrifice, she insisted, but the trees behind us rustled. Alive. Free. It wasn't a perfect victory. Clara and a few others turned away, their fear too deep to uproot. But others stayed, listening, and my mom stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. Let them go, she said, and the crowd parted. We walked away, hand in hand, the forest humming softly, as if blessing our departure. We didn't go far, not yet. We found a cabin deep in Blackthorn, one Kale had built centuries ago, hidden from the world. It was small, rough, but ours. We spent our days rebuilding it, our nights rebuilding each other. Kale taught me the forest's secrets, and I taught him how to live again, how to laugh without the weight of eternity. We were free, but not untouched. Haven's End would always be a shadow, a reminder of what we'd overcome. One night, under a sky full of stars, Kale pulled me close, his breath warm against my ear. I watched you because I saw hope, he said. You gave me back my life. I kissed him, slow and sure, and the forest sighed around us. No longer a god's domain, but a home. We weren't chosen for sacrifice anymore. We were chosen for each other, and that was enough.